Our next guest says her childhood was turned upside down one fateful day when her dad said, "We're going to follow Captain Cook." Now, in her new book, Wavewalker, a memoir of breaking free, Suzanne Heywood chronicles her voyage around the world at just 7 years old, traveling through storms and shipwrecks, getting very little formal schooling, and, of course, all of the crashing tides with family relationships as you're dealing with that. Suzanne, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you so much. Delighted to be here.
It's a pleasure to meet you. I think we have everyone's attention just with that introduction, but if you could... This is a wild story, and you got a whole book's worth of tales, but if you could just give people a little background of what your childhood was like out on sailing the world.
Yeah, so basically we set sail when I was 7 years old, and I ended up being at sea for 10 years, for a decade. My father originally said we were going to go sailing for 3 years, but he just kept sailing, which meant, of course, I couldn't go to school, I couldn't have friends, we were on this boat. And the story really is a very intense story because it ends up being all about the family relationships that evolve on this boat as the years go by.
Right, which, of course, speaks to how extraordinary it is that the sailing around the world for 10 years is secondary to the tale. It's one thing to have a life that is extraordinary, and you certainly have one, but what made you think this is a book this is a story that I want to tell to people?
Well, it is an extraordinary adventure story. We get shipwrecked in the Indian Ocean. We get hit by an enormous wave. I end up having head operations on a tiny atoll in the middle of nowhere. We go to some extraordinary places. And then it's a story of escape because I have to teach myself. I basically have to self-educate myself to get out of there, to get to university. So it's also a tale about the power of education. And I've gone on from there to, create a much more normal life for myself. But I came from a boatyard.
And I believe that surgery that you mentioned, that had to happen without anesthesia, is that correct?
That's right, in the middle of the Indian Ocean, because we ended up shipwrecked on a tiny atoll in the middle of nowhere.
I mean, I'm sure that this was a gradual process, but over the course of 10 years, you're a child, you're figuring things out about the world in your own right, but how was that gradual process of learning, this is something that I need to break away from?
It came over time, you see, because when we set sail and I was only 7 years old, I thought this was a magical adventure story. We met whales, we saw phosphorescence, we saw dolphins. But as time went on, I began to realize that this thing that looked like an amazing voyage was increasingly like a prison. I was trapped on board this boat with my father, my mother, my brother, and I couldn't get away. I couldn't spend time with friends. I couldn't do any of the normal things that you would expect to do. And that's when I decided I had to break away.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned this right off the top, but beyond just being about, sailing and shipwrecks, and those are all enthralling tales, but it is about your family relationships. How do you view your parents as people now?
So I think my father is an amazing adventurer. But I think if you're going to be an adventurer of that sort, you've got to take account of your family. To take a child with you for, a few months would be absolutely fine. But to take your children with you for a decade, I think is very tough. And I'm a mum now myself. I've got 3 kids. I would never take my kids away for 10 years. Frankly, they never want to go sailing. So I don't think I'm going to get the chance.
Right, let alone for 10 years,
That's right.
10 hours. I mean, the term breaking free right there in the title, there's the obvious literal definition of breaking free of your family, but I would imagine it has some much larger context. So what does breaking free really mean to you?
For me, breaking free was breaking out of a dream. My father had a dream, which was to sail around the world. And that dream started off as a 3-year dream. It ended up being a decade-long dream. And for me, breaking free was coming out of somebody else's dream and creating a life for myself.
What do you want people to take away from your story?
Well, I hope they really enjoy the book. I really, really hope they enjoy the book. But I also want them to take from that the power of education. And I hope adventurers, any adventurers that read it, think about the children that they involve.
Right. The people that are along for the ride.
Yes, you don't get a choice to go with them.
Yes, and it's useful even if you're not sailing the world. Suzanne, thank you so much for being here. Wavewalker, a memoir of breaking free, can be found wherever books are sold. Suzanne, wonderful to meet you. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.